Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. It is 10:07 on a beautiful Monday morning. Beautiful weekend. We got some pretty sweet rain. We got a nice rainstorm yesterday. We kind of needed some rain. It didn't last too long, but we got some good rain. The weather has been super amazing, and it's been hot, and it's been very summer-like. Usually, in the past or the last few years, August, it seems to like starts to start cooling off. But it's been pretty hot and it's been beautiful. I just get kind of depressed this time of year just because it's like the end. Kind of we're in midsummer now and school is starting up pretty soon, and then summer's coming to a close slowly. And I always I hate when that starts. I mean, I love the fall, but I love the summer. I really think that summertime in Maine is like the most beautiful place on earth. So, and it always goes by so damn quickly. But I do like the fall. The winters have gotten better for me. I mean, I do like the winters to a degree. It's you have more downtime to work on projects, I guess, and what have you. But anyway, I went to the movies on Saturday with some friends, and I have I uploaded the video. I got to do some work to it before I post it. I will probably post it tomorrow. I usually do a video. For the most part, I do a video every day, and usually like I was in the habit before I went out on tour and I was out of town for a week or so. I was like posting videos like as premieres. But I go back and forth now. I've been just kind of uploading the videos, and I want to thank again got some new been getting some new subscribers and the folks that are have been really supportive of this channel. I really thank you guys for continually commenting on the videos, and it's a lot of fun. It's super fun, and I look forward to doing it every pretty much each and every day. And I've been I saw the brand new movie Weapons on Saturday. I really loved it. I thought it was kind of an awesome movie. I was really surprised by it. Didn't know anything. I went into it really cold. So I did a show on that, and that should be uploaded probably by tomorrow. And around that, and in the meantime, I went to Bull Moose about a week ago. Yeah, a week ago from this past Sunday, which was yesterday. And man, I went to the Waterville Bull Moose, and I was just blown away. I was overwhelmed by how much cool shit they had there. The way the whole store is set up now, especially with movies, each they have like boutique specific boutique labeled or boutique labels are now have their own aisle and aisles. Like there's like a Severin aisle. There's like an Arrow. These are all big companies that put out all these exploitation movies. It's wild. Like I kind of couldn't believe it. It felt like Christmas morning. So I'm excited to definitely go back there. I'm going to try to go back there, at some point. But in the meantime, I bought a bunch of really just fantastic movies. So I've been really excited about talking about them and doing shows. And so today is on a movie that I had been wanting to get. It had been on my peripheral for a long time. It was a movie that I watched, a bunch of times when I was a kid, and but not since then. I haven't seen it since I was probably, 12 or 13 years old. But I watched it. I remember it was on. It's an old school slasher film, and it was out, in the 80s. Kept seeing this movie in the shops doing my travels, going to Bull Moose for a while, and then I saw it again there. I saw it. I went to Bull Moose twice in the last month. I went uh, about a week ago for to Bull Moose in Waterville, and I got a big haul of movies. And then I think it was a week before that, or 2 weeks before, I went to Bull Moose and got another great collection of movies. I was in Bangor. I went to the Bull Moose in Bangor, and I bought this then. So I had this. I've had this for a few weeks, and I watched it pretty much after I buy movies. I will watch them. Watch them right away. And the movie that is today's topic is Sorority House Massacre, 1986. Classic slasher movie. I think again, I'm I'm a I am such a sucker for slasher movies. Slasher movies are my favorite movies of all time. It's my favorite genre. It's again, it's part of the exploitation world, and it's I seek out slasher things. Like if I again, I try to buy when I go to Bull Moose. I try to find. I mean, to be totally honest, I try to find the most obscure, the most bizarre, most low budget, piece of trash that I can find. That's I don't usually go there with, oh, okay, I want to buy this movie, or I'm gonna, occasionally I will do that. Last year when in 2024, which was a really great year for movies, I did that. Like I bought, what did I buy? I bought In a Violent Nature and then Long Legs. Two new movies that had come out that last year that I really really loved. So occasionally I do buy that, and then I buy movies that with an idea. And then I remember buying the Prey, which was the last, most recent installment to the Predator franchise. Another movie I just love. So I do buy new movies, and I will sometimes go with, okay, I got to get this movie or whatnot on Blu-ray. But typically, for the most part, I go there with a clean slate. I just love to search through the aisles and discover stuff. But usually the only intentions that I have, or my only focus is to try to find, just really obscure movies, because and so what ends up happening is I end up buying a bunch of movies that I haven't seen before, and then a movie like this, which is kind of both. I mean, it's a movie that Sorority House Massacre is a movie I saw a bunch of times when I was a kid, but and the one thing I do try to actually do in the end is to I really want to have a really full and complete collection of slasher movies. I mean, in general, I want to do that's what I want to do as far as my collection when it comes to all things exploitation. A lot of old school exploitation movies, a lot of giallo films. That's in general. That's generally where my focus is. But when it comes to the slasher genre, that's like definitely a priority. So I've gotten some really fantastic slasher movies over the last few months, and I'm gonna probably do. I did a big show. I think it was last year where I did a big giant list and show of all of my favorite slasher movies, all the movies that I have in my collection. And since then, I've gotten quite a few more. So I'm gonna probably do an upgrade video where I'm gonna do another like part two of some newer titles that I've gotten. And I definitely think my top slasher movies, say top 5 or top 10, is that order is still pretty much there, but I've added a lot more movies to the my collection. My easily my favorite slasher movie of all time is Bill Luswig's Maniac, but everything else kind of interchanges and kind of moves around a little bit, and especially so I'm thinking of doing another show where I'm going to talk about some newer purchases like this. And again, this came out in 1986. Classic slasher film. I think if you're into exploitation movies, and if you're into especially if you're into slasher movies, this is like kind of an essential movie. I think this is definitely one of the in the genre itself, one of the more popular movies, and I think it's one of the most fun movies. It's got great kills, great atmosphere, It's it's a cheese fest. It's got everything you want from a a great old school slasher movie. Again, I don't often say it, but I really think it's you know a thing that I hold on to. Part it's a lot of it's nostalgia. It's a nostalgic thing too because my exposure to horror films and then early on being so exposed to slasher movies and just always having such a fun ride. Going having that feeling of like going to an amusement park and you know watching this awesome transfer on Blu-ray is again it's a beautiful transfer of this classic slasher movie. There's some really great special features on here. There's all kinds of interviews. There's a really good like featurette. And one of the things that I always see, especially when it comes to a lot of these old school movies, and granted, it's like Sorority House Massacre came out in '86, which is I kind of feel that like the slasher genre, like as far as when it was at its like apex, when it was at the highest level, where there were so many movies coming out, there were so many great movies coming out in the genre, and I think about in the late '80s, probably '87, '88, I got a movie recently also that I'm going to talk about, which is a an Australian slasher exploitation movie, and I believe that came out in like '88, '89. And I kind of feel like it's safe to say that in the late '80s was when the slasher genre started to kind of, you know, lose a little bit of its steam and it kind of tapered off. I think once the '90s hit, things kind of shifted. And in general, horror movies took a big hit. For about once the '90s came, horror movies were still coming out, and but there was this weird transitional period where I felt like a lot of the genre itself wasn't as popular, and it really wasn't until when Scream came out. Wes Craven was when that movie really kind of reignited the interest by the public to go see slasher movies again and horror movies and I actually really love that movie Scream. Not a huge not a huge fan of the franchise really. I just feel like it's the same things over and over again, and it just lacks any kind of creativity after a while. But I do love the first one, and I do really love the second one. After that, I'm kind of on the fence. It's a fun franchise, but the first Scream movie was really a really seismic, pivotal thing that happened for horror movies. I mean, I really think it's safe to say that that, and it's definitely a slasher movie. But it really rekindled the public's interest in horror movies because for quite a few years, a lot of horror films just kind of died and they lost their popularity. But in the late '70s through the '80s, I mean, they were huge, and Sorority House Massacre was kind of like slowly, well, kind of at the tail end of all of that the slasher explosion, and so I'd say '89, a few years after this movie came out, late '80s was when it started to, all the dust settled. It started to the popularity started to kind of dwindle. But man, it was when you look at the '80s and then in the '70s, I mean it's an amazing. Those decades were fire really when it comes to slasher movies. I mean, the sheer amount of slasher movies that came out, were, you had all of these American films coming out, and then all of these great Canadian films coming out, and Spanish films, like movies like Pieces, and then My Bloody Valentine, and the Friday 13th franchise, and Maniac, and Mad Men. I mean, the list is endless. And there were so many movies coming out. And from what I remember and from what I know about Sorority House Massacre, this movie in the genre was a very popular film. And I do believe that there's like three or four. Another one is Sleepaway Camp, another massive film in the franchise. I love that movie to death as well. There's like four movies to that franchise, and I believe with Sorority House Massacre, there's also I think there's like three or four movies in that for it turned into a big franchise. Again, it was directed by Carol Frank. Great cast. It's one of the best, and the special features on here are fantastic. So yeah, like again what I said before. I think if you're a fan of slasher movies, 80s, super low budget slasher movies like this one, this is definitely an essential movie for your collection. And the thing that I don't like, and I don't like, I brought up about how in the like 89 or so, you know, historically that's kind of when the genre kind of started to kind of die off, and it wasn't until Wes Craven's Scream where horror in general, you know, slasher, the slasher genre was dying a slow death at that point, and then horror films in general were, nobody was really going to see them anymore in the theater, and it wasn't until Wes Craven's Scream came out. And again, I do love that movie. I think it's it has that breaking third wall thing. It's got a real interesting narrative where it kind of makes fun of you know the genre to a degree and has a lot of fun with that, and then has all of these amazing references to so many great films that came out before it. It was a very innovative movie, and Wes Craven, was you know one of the masters. And again, I do love that movie, but the problem of why, and one of the reasons why, and I've talked about this before. But the difference for me with like the 70s and the 80s slasher films compared to say the 90s slasher movies, like again, when Scream came out, it was a huge trendsetter, and there were the slasher genre more or less came back, and there's a ton of slasher movies that came out in the 90s, and even recently, there's still like the slasher genre is still massively popular, thankfully, and there's been even in recent times this year, even Heart Eyes, Hell of a Summer were two most recent slasher movies, even though I was not a fan of those movies. But and then last year in A Violent Nature, which I love that movie to death. There were they still come out, and slasher films are huge. And there's a Clown in the Cornfield, which I think is a new movie that just came out, which I really want to see. So there's still like lots of slasher movies that are coming out, and the genre is huge. But the difference for me, like with the '90s, when I Know What You Did Last Summer, and then there was like subsequent sequels to that, and a bunch of other slasher films that came out during that time, and I think it's the same problem for me with new slasher films, with the exception of like, in A Violent Nature. When I compare like the '90s to, the movies that come out now and in the 2020s, compared to the '80s and the '70s, the thing that I love so much, or that the things that I love so much about the slasher films in the '70s and '80s, you know, you have the typical tropes of or typical storyline of, you have a group of like young kids or young people at some place of isolation like a cabin in the woods, or a cabin by the water in the and it's just, you have this rich atmosphere. They get picked off by this mysterious killer one by one. There's a little bit of mystery around it, and with great kills, and there's lots of violence, and then lots of sex, scenes of some drug use, all the things we all want from a good slasher movie. But the thing is about a lot of those older slasher films, where the genre started in comparison, whereas I felt like all the kids and the people in those movies and just the atmosphere itself, everything was a lot more raw. Uh, there was an element of kind of sleaziness to everything. They were low budget, and even like the cast for a lot of those films in the 70s and 80s, like you had teenagers, or young people, in these movies, in those movies, but they weren't like, they looked like regular kids. Like they looked like regular kids, everyday people, everyday teenagers, with teen angst, and then when it comes to say a group of people in their 20s and 30s, the same thing. They just kind of look like normal, regular day people. And but there's like a gritty aspect as it to a lot of those films. The kills are really brutal. There's all like everything is practical effects. Everything is in camera. They're low budget. They're fun, and they sometimes explore and really push the envelope, and explore certain taboos that we're not really willing to talk about these days. And like newer slasher films, and it really happened, I felt like in the 90s, where you do have those same kind of tropes, but suddenly I felt like all the cast for a lot of these movies, everybody looks like a supermodel. Everybody's really pretty. Everybody, everybody's hair is really perfectly kept and cleaned and washed and combed. There's everybody just looks too pretty, if that makes any sense. And every film in comparison to the 70s and 80s in the slasher genre in the 90s, and I think that's one of the big problems now with newer slasher films, is everything is really slick and clean, and there's like a higher production value. And I think I think a good slasher movie should be made with very little money, because you have to like have a heavier reliance on your creatively on your imagination, on like what you can do with very little. And I think a lot of the newer slasher movies that have come out have a higher production value. They have a bigger budget. They have a lot of major studios hopped on board, and the cast again looks too clean, too perfect, and everything is really slick. And there's a lot of reliance on, it's moved away from practical effects. Practical effects, though, I think all cool things that happen in culture always kind of come back, like full circle. And and we see that all the time. I mean, there's always going to be that kind of retro thing of people, whether it's like effects, practical effects, in camera effects, stunt effects. When you have these decades of where it was done so well, and then you have it move to where CGI and all of these things became readily available, and things kind of get lost in that translation. And then so they kind of revert back to like, okay, let's try making these things as more realistic. Same thing happens, I think, with bands and music, with recording albums and recording songs. You have this slicker, more efficient way to do it now, and things have moved fully into the digital era. But then there's that thing of the magic of the 70s and 80s, of where these bands were recording things on tape, and it was live, and it wasn't like a track wasn't it was done live. It wasn't all punched in, one part at a time. So like that's been a thing that now has kind of come back to a certain degree, and those things won't ever go away. So I think that's a real big difference. With a lot of the newer slasher films is that they're a little bit more sanitized. They don't show as much as far as the kills like in camera. Everybody looks a little too pretty, a little too nice. It doesn't have that grainy, dirty feel to it. And Sorority House Massacre is one of those great slasher movies, and it has, I feel, all, and it's really fun. It's a really fun movie, but it has some brutal kills, and it's got all of those great, wonderful elements as that represent everything as to why I love this genre so much. So, can't recommend this movie enough. 1986 was a good year. It's this is an essential film to own if you're a slasher fan. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.